In this episode of Cosmic Sponge, a badger discovers Roman gold, a new UFO show is due out summer 2022, an innovative approach for tracking UFOs is on the horizon, and finally, Steven uses a tin can for a mic in honor of our main topic, Hellier, a documentary on everything strange, which also gives Jason the opportunity to help us with our enunciation.
It's a sound, it's not a letter, it's Terry-wrist.
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast where we talk about UFOs and other weird wonders in the world. I'm Stephen Hall.
And I'm Jimmy Coe, and I know how to use technology.
And joining us on this weird, twisty adventure is our guest host and the host of the Esoteric Book Club, Jason Reuhl. Welcome back to the show, Jason.
Glad to be here.
Tonight, what we're going to be talking about is a documentary or a TV show that's on Amazon right now as we record this, called Hellier. It is about a group of investigators that head down to eastern Kentucky to try and solve a mystery. And we're going to get into that in just a little bit. Before we do, Jimmy, Jason, what you guys been up to this week? Anything good?
I drink a full bottle of wine.
Well, that's every day.
No, it's not. It only seems that way.
Well, Jason, I hope you've been up to something a little more productive.
Well, I have. It's not been a bottle of wine, but I've been researching some news articles for the next episode.
All right, well, great. Well, let's just jump right into that then. What do you have for us on the news front?
Well, there's been a lot of treasure hoards that have been unexcavated in Europe recently. One in Spain was opened up by a badger, believe it or not. Yeah.
A treasure hunting badger.
Yeah. So apparently this was last winter. Spain got hit by a huge snowstorm. Apparently it shut down a good portion of the country, and a lot of animals were starving at the time. And the best guess right now is that this badger went into a cave looking for food and instead found a treasure trove of Roman-era coins.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
How did the coins get from the badger to a human being?
Now, is the badger going to run into any kind of tax problems or anything like that now? Or
Probably, most likely.
It is.
And did the badger reach out to the scientific community and let him know about his find? Or
Well, as far as I can tell, it was discovered well after the fact, and they just assume it's a badger based on the dig marks that was left behind. Have you ever seen a skunk that's digging for grubs?
Oh, yeah.
They leave a similar hole, but much, much larger. They found this, they excavated the rest of the coins. It's all the way from the Mediterranean, Constantinople, and they actually found some from the old Roman city of London.
Oh, that's awesome. And you hear about that happening in Europe all the time, man, where these
badgers
not necessarily badgers, but like some farmer will be out in his field plowing, or somebody, just finds a big box of gold. Usually what a lot of people presume is that when the Roman Empire was collapsing, people started stashing their wealth or burying it somewhere or whatever, then never came back for it. Couldn't come back for it or whatever. So
it's actually what they suggest happened with this treasure trove is that because of the last dates of the coins, they dated it to the time when the German tribes known as the Swabians were moving into Spain. And this would have been a tradesman who, because there was such a wide variety of coins, they just found this location in a cave and stashed it and never made it back.
They may have evacuated and said, don't worry, things will blow over. We'll be back to get our life savings in a little while. So,
but those Germans just stuck around.
They just stuck around.
With their crafty badger friends.
That's fascinating.
But yeah, you also mentioned that farmers would find things that come up in their fields. Leads to the next article I read about, and it's something called a rainbow cup. Have you ever heard of those?
No.
Neither have I. So it's a type of Celtic coin. I don't know why, but they were dome-shaped, and they're just solid gold. The idea is they got their name because they would turn up in fields after rain, and the legend said that these show up wherever the rainbow actually touches ground.
So it's a leprechaun myth.
Exactly. But these were found in Germany, which is really interesting because the portion of Germany where these were found was not a Celtic country.
Now, how did that happen?
Well, all the coins were the exact same type and minting, so they're assuming that this was a single one-off event where someone lost or, again, stashed their coinage and never came back for it.
It was probably Bigfoot.
Oh, it's always Bigfoot.
It was a Celtic Bigfoot. Came in statues. So it's called a rainbow cup.
Yeah, Rainbow Cup. They come in two sizes. That's 2 centimeter is the largest denomination, and there is 1.5 centimeter ones, which are called quarter strands or something like that. It's basically that's the quarter, and then there's the dollar coin or the equivalent of it.
Right. Did they say how much the total stash was worth in modern dollars?
Honestly, no. They just said it would have been a priceless value for the owner.
Wow.
They didn't convert it. And these are solid gold coins. And I believe they found 40 something, and they're not
Jeez.
light. Yeah. That's a lot of gold.
Yeah, if I'm finding that gold in a field somewhere, I'm not telling anybody. I'm not telling the Archaeological Society or the government. Finding a black market dealer. That's what I'm doing.
Well, imagine making that contact. Hey, I've got a bunch of rainbow cups for you. You're going to have to expand on that a little bit. I'm not sure what you're selling me.
I'm not from New Orleans. Come on, man.
Yeah.
I was looking here. I was trying to figure out gold. I was looking at the price of gold right now, modern gold, and it shows $1,839.75
per ounce.
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Could be a lot of money, man. A lot of money.
Now, I could go back later and estimate the value because they did list the weight of each coin on there. So that might be a fun thing to do for my own episode.
That's what we're going to do, folks. Jason's going to figure out exactly how much this haul is worth, and then he'll post it on his episode. Go over there and check it out. And then that way, how much money you'll get if you find a bunch of rainbow cups laying around in your backyard. Not likely in America, folks.
Yeah, not in North America anyway. Yeah. When you look at that, right, there's the value of just the metal itself if you melted it down and then got all this gold. But obviously there's a historical value to these coins that really, in a way, go beyond all that. Literally a pricelessness to history, like the big box of all the different coins from Constantinople and places all over the empire at the end of the Roman Empire.
Being a gold coin, you have to wonder how many of these previously have been melted down.
Now, I've thought about that a lot. For instance, when they always say grave robbers or whatever, through the centuries, think about in third world countries, let's say, or in the Middle East, or if you think about South America, Mexico, there's a very good possibility that some of these treasures were found and they're just melted down for the raw materials. Because if they do turn and say, hey, look, I found this gold cup and it's a historical item, well, then it may just, depending on the government, I guess, just say seize it and say, well, that belongs to the state. Whereas you show up with some precious metal and somehow sell it. I don't know. I wouldn't know. If I had a hunk of gold, I wouldn't even know where to go. Go down to the pawn shop. Hey, man, what do you give me for this hunk of gold? Where do you sell gold?
Around here, pawn shops.
I'll give you $25 for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So let's move on, Jimmy. Did you come up with anything?
Did I come up with anything? Of course I came up with something. Yeah, so CNN has a show. It's a new season of Stanley Tucci. He has just a bunch of different topics that he covers. Like, for example, he's going to be including Last Witness Watergate, as if we haven't beaten that story to death. But he's also going to do a story on UFOs, UFOs being the working title at this point. It's going to look at the history of government civilian investigations, which we've done some in some of our episodes. It's going to be a 5-part series from the creators of Surviving Death and will debut this summer.
Definitely looking forward to that show.
For sure. And then I also have a recap that I found about what to expect in 2022 in terms of UFO and UAPs and the legal system and how it set up some of these programs to monitor it going forward in the future and the more scientific approach they seem to be taking. The UAP amendment, which was passed on December 27th, signed into law, includes $768.2 billion for the National Defense Authorization Act. And this creates a new group, which has a freaking long name, the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group. Big mouthful there. They have a bunch of new UAP spotting gear that they've developed that's going to allow them to monitor our skies and collect information on any anomalies that might show up. They'll be able to cross-reference that with other databases that contain information about where satellites are or whether any of the Tesla-type Starlink stuff. So all of those different things that are in the skies, including airliners, weather balloons, and other type of balloons that are used for very scientific purposes, be included in this large database, and they'll be able to track items in the sky, eliminate things that we know are up there, And then whatever's left, they'll be able to pay a little bit more attention to those so that maybe we'll get a little bit more answers in this with this more scientific approach. Maybe we're not kicking those dollars into a wheelbarrow and burning them in our backyard. And instead, we'll actually see some results from them.
We'll see, if they find anything really unusual, or there'll never be disclosure from the government. If they find something amazing, they're not going to share it with the public.
It sounds like a good program, but I agree. What are we going to see out of this? We're going to see what they want us to see.
Yeah, they just want to keep people quiet. That's really, in the long run, all Blue Book ended up being was just sort of a PR thing. I hope I'm wrong.
I don't think you are.
I guess we'll just move on to tonight's main topic. But before we do, we remind everyone to please rate and review the podcast. It helps other people find the show. And don't forget to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Go to our webpage, cosmicsponge.com. That way you can find ways to support the show. And you could also visit our web store and buy something for your friends or yourself or your family. Anyway, thanks everyone for listening. We really appreciate it. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is the documentary, just simply called Hellier. It's available right now on Amazon, but I think also YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I will warn you right now that there are going to be spoilers about this documentary. So if it's a documentary that you have in your watch list and you're thinking, hey man, I want to watch this, I don't want to know anything about it, I want to start fresh, then you may not want to listen. If you don't care, here we go. Jason, why don't you give us a rundown on what is Hellier? What's it all about, Stevie?
The show is featuring Greg and Dana Newkirk. They're investigators. It starts out he was a ghost hunter in his teens. He had this defunct website that was still active and still receiving mail. And he gets an email one day from a guy, I believe his name was David, in Kentucky, in the town of Hellier.
Dr. David Christie.
That's what it was, yes. And he said he's got these little things, he calls them goblins, that are terrorizing his kids, his dogs, and everything at night, and he needs help. And he sent along some photos of footprints. The investigation just balloons from there.
With many twists and turns.
Greg, as Jason had said, had a web page where him and a bunch of friends, when they were teenagers, did ghost hunting stuff. But the page was still active. Someone sends him this cryptic email from Hellier, Kentucky, saying that he's being terrorized, him and his family's being terrorized by this. Now, this is in 2012. He goes on a podcast, I don't remember which one it was, and he's talking about it on this podcast. And the filmmaker, Carl Pfeiffer, hears the podcast, and I think somehow he's thinking about this or something at the time, and he reaches out because this is actually 3 years later after he had received the email. I think he'd followed up a couple of times. Greg did, who originally received the email, went back and forth a couple of times, and I think even got a photograph. The guy said he was going to clean out his leave or whatever, but then after that he disappeared, and that was that. He didn't really do a whole lot more with it, I don't think, from that point. Or, no, actually him and Dana, don't they drive down there and try and figure out where the house is at before Pfeiffer gets involved? Like the year before, I think, because they drive around, they go to Hellier, Kentucky and drive around.
Yeah, I think they were on their way to another event or another convention, and they just stopped by because it was within driving distance.
Yeah. And they go in and just look around. And I think Hellier, Kentucky is just this super small place in Pike County, Kentucky. Incidentally, my wife has family from Pike County, Kentucky. They stop at a gas station and some kind of combination gas station, pizza place, and grocery store, I think is the way they described it, and talked to a few people, and they're like, yeah, we've seen some strange things here and all that. But then that's pretty much it. And they drive around, they find one house, and they think, well, this could be the house by the description. There's a shed because that's in the email and some other things. But then they leave it from there. And like I said, when Pfeiffer hears the podcast is whenever he reaches out to Greg and Dana and says, hey, I want to make a documentary about this. Let's investigate this. That's the way I understood it. Is that?
Yeah, let's be clear here that Hellier is a great name for a location for a documentary. That's a great name. And anyone who's been to Hellier, it's 12 houses and 300 people, and they all look the same. That's not true. It's a small town. It's a really small town. It's like many of the small towns in southern West Virginia.
It struck me as more like an unincorporated area.
Yeah, exactly.
Not a town at all, really.
Yeah, from the looks of it, it hadn't even reached the level of a one-stoplight town. I don't think they have traffic lights there.
I don't think it was a town at all. I think it was probably one of those communities where they put a post office at some point, and then that's why it was unincorporated.
Yeah. They had one stop sign, and I saw that was full of bullet holes. So I think that was the practicing range for the town. And I'm very familiar with that because that's my hometown, baby. That's the place I grew up. The southern West Virginia is riddled with those small towns, very much like that. And for David Christie to be able to hide in that town and no one to know who he is.
Hold on. Not just David Christie, Dr. David Christie.
Dr. David. Well, okay, let's be fair here, okay? There's two kinds of doctors. There's the kind of doctor that matters, say like a medical doctor. And there's this kind of doctor nobody gives rat's ass about, and that's like a doctor of philosophy or a doctor of communications or a million different doctorates that you can get from university. Just saying.
Well, now that you mention it, did they ever specify what type of doctor he was?
Not in the letter, no.
They did not.
So I was trying to find a copy. You guys have a copy of that letter or anything? I was trying to find it.
The copy of the email from David Christie?
Yeah.
I don't have it, but the first season, they do a really good job of having a voice actor come in. And that first episode is fantastic.
The first episode of this documentary, first of all, it's a really well-made documentary for an independent project. They obviously have some nice gear and stuff. It's not a Hollywood production here.
But it's well done.
But it is extremely well done and very professional. And the first episode is absolutely one of the best setups I've ever heard for the mystery, I think. What do you think on that, Jason?
The filmography of season 1 as a whole was just excellent. The pacing, the story, the way they reveal the plot a little at a time, they did really well with that. But it was, like 6 episodes?
5, I think.
5, I think.
5?
Yeah. Anyway, it's really well made, and the setup for it, like the whole first episode, this is who, Greg and Dana say, hey, this is who we are, this is what we do. They have their own podcast, YouTube show, I think, and some things to deal with the paranormal. They did a real good job of all that. And also the filmmaker enlisted another friend of his that's a paranormal investigator.
Tyler, I think, right? Tyler and Connor. Connor Randall and Tyler Strand were also pulled in to help with this.
Connor was in season 1. Tyler came in for season 2.
Right. Yeah, he has a very brief mention in season 1, Tyler Strand. But now the other guy's a pretty main player in this thing. But anyway, like I said, it's a fantastic setup. They read the email. They talk about it. I don't have a copy of the email, but a couple things really stuck out to me. In the email, the Dr. Christie describes these goblins that have come around that he believes, at first he thinks there's just one of them, but he thinks that they're coming out of abandoned coal mines in the area. Now, keep in mind, this is eastern Kentucky, so there's plenty of abandoned mines, plenty of this stuff around. A lot of them are sealed up, some are not. So whenever they have an email exchange, Greg ends up receiving, again, this is all back in 2012, receives a photograph of what looks like a 3-toed footprint.
In Slurry.
In Slurry. Yes. Which was identified later, and coal slurry is where a mine gets flooded and then all the stuff gets washed out of a sealed mine. That's what coal slurry is.
Do identify if you're from southern West Virginia in particular or eastern Kentucky, because, man, that's the toxic mud you play in. You recognize it. Some of your friends have 3 toes on their feet, so you immediately think, hey, that's Robert's footprint,
Yeah, just to be clear, we don't have slurry in my county. I don't think they have them up there either, where you live.
Sure we do.
I don't think there's any coal mines here. In Mercer County, I don't think. Now, the neighboring county,
McDowell,
sure. McDowell County, which is incidentally right over the border from Pike County, Kentucky.
And Mon County definitely has some.
Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, when I bought my home, we looked at the map of mines, underground mines, to see what it looks like. So there are mine tunnels underneath us going all the way up to, but not going right up underneath us, but not exactly underneath our home. So just like 350 feet one way, about 75 feet another way, and another way there's 150 feet. There's mines underneath us.
You better be careful. Those little goblins might be coming out on you, man.
Fingers crossed.
I got a nut. I got a net and some tranquilizer darts. I'm ready to go, man.
Yeah. So anyway, Anna, Dr. Christie believes, so yeah, he receives a second email. But one thing that really stuck out to me again, when he's reading the email, the language that was used in it, that's why I wish I had the copy of the letter. Because one thing I remember was he said, I think it's coming out of an abandoned mine on my property, but I don't want to go down there by my lonesome. And I remember that sticking out to me because I'm like, nobody really uses that kind of language. And I really doubt whether it's a medical doctor or a dentist or a doctor of philosophy would use some of the language that was in this letter.
Oh, let me tell you, I've known some academics from like doctorates of English or one of the more esoteric humanities. They would use that. They would
esoteric. Did they start a book club?
I have a history degree, so it all makes perfect sense to me.
Jason, have you been to Hellier anytime in the recent past?
Not recently. So actually, the language in the emails plays a key part in both seasons of this because they use that to identify certain words and phrases and identify those with individuals. Specifically, Terry Wrist.
Yeah, Terry Wrist. Okay, so I mean, really, but Terry R. Wrist, but
it's W, right? Terry W. Wrist, or is it R?
No, it's R.
Terry R. Wrist. It's a sound. It's not a letter. It's Terry Wrist. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does Terry Wrist come into this? How does this terrorist come into this story?
In the email, he says, the original email, he says, we have a mutual friend, Terry R. Wrist. So that's where they start investigating terrorist. Terry Wrist.
So, and of course, Greg Newkirk sitting there scratching his head going, I don't know anybody by that name.
Yeah, and he points out, hey, look, it could be a sham. I get it, terrorist. He does point out the fact that this doesn't all add up to me. It could definitely be something fake here, just somebody emailing him. But then he got very excited because a third email came that told Greg that they had to leave their house because it just got too bad with these little creatures, these goblins, maybe aliens or whatever, running around terrorizing his family. But he took a few pictures. Now, there is absolutely nothing conclusive about what is in those pictures. But he claims that these pictures are of the aliens. And then that's the last correspondence that he had. So he essentially had 3 of these emails from way back in 2012. At some point, again, I don't remember exactly when, him and his wife, Dana, decide to go investigate it on their own, but it's only very briefly, just a drive-through. I don't think they even spent the night or anything. The filmmaker, Pfeiffer, reaches out to him and says, hey, let's do a documentary on this. And that's how the whole thing gets started. And that's how what wraps up, I think, the first episode. I mean, and it's a beautiful setup. It's great. Be a good setup for a horror movie, really. Especially if they showed up at the house and there's like blood everywhere, but there's no bodies.
It's almost as horrifying when in season 2 they tracked down where the house was. And there's no house left. It burnt to the ground.
Okay.
So that adds to the mystery, but it's still... There's no evidence now. It's just completely vanished.
So in the next episode, they get together. They rent a house in Hellier, as best as I can remember. They rent this house, not in Hellier, because Hellier really has no accommodations. Again, it's super small, just kind of area, but it's in a neighboring town somewhere. And they set up shop in this house. And they do a lot of talk and a lot of speculation. Dana does some kind of little ritual. She lights some candles and does a little sacrificial offering to appease the spirits or something there. So didn't quite know what to make of that, but okay.
I figured you guys wouldn't be too familiar with what was going on in that. So
you figure right, Jason. That's why we brought you in on this one.
Okay. So honestly, what she did in that episode is very simple. It's just basically making contact with any spirits of the land, things that exist in the physical location where they're at. It's just saying, hey, here we are. Don't be scared of us. We want to talk to you if you're available and things like that. That is a very big juxtaposition from what happens towards the end of season 2, but we'll get to that eventually.
I just want to interject here a little bit because, of course, the paranormal side of things that are geared toward spirits, ghosts, psychics, all that stuff, not my wheelhouse at all. I'm more the UFO guy. So more like Greg, because I get a sense that Greg's the UFO guy and Dana is the more of the paranormal spirits person in the show.
I
Greg
don't
even says
know.
as much.
No, Greg, he cut the ping pong balls in half and was having visions or something there. So,
Well, sure, later, but at some point he does say that Dana's more geared toward that stuff than he is.
she's kind of into the witchy kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Dana's a practicing witch.
So I'm not familiar with all this stuff. And Jason, just jump in here and explain to me what a spirit box is and how that works. Because I know that at some point, Pfeiffer goes in and Carl goes in and explains sort of how one works, which is great. He does a great explanation. But maybe you can just sort of help our listeners understand what a spirit box is.
Okay, so this whole scenario is around something called an Estes session that I've never encountered until this episode or this series. So we've all heard EVPs on all the ghost hunting shows. They record stuff and ambient noise in the background, and they listen back to it. Yeah, they listen for whispers, things like that. And a spirit box is basically doing the same thing, but it's randomly going through radio frequencies at a very fast pace. The concept is that a spirit will interact with it and basically activate the words when it needs to speak, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, physically what this device is, from my understanding, it's a radio, and I think you can do either FM or AM bands, multiple bands, but it quickly goes through all the frequencies on your dial. So you look at your radio, if you have an old analog style radio, and think of it being at a certain, like at the bottom of the dial, like 540, and then zooming all the way to 1150 or wherever it ends. And just going back and forth, basically just going back and forth through all these bands very quickly, and much quicker than you could actually reach out and turn these dials back and forth by yourself. And so you may have to be a little bit older to understand what that sounds like. But now this device does it very quickly. It's going back and forth through all these bands. And so as this happens, apparently words are formed in the white noise that that you can hear through the headphones as you're doing this. I'm assuming you could also do it without headphones.
Yeah, the headphones specifically is for the Estes session, where the person listening for the words is isolated from everything else around them. They're usually blindfolded so they can't see, and they have noise-canceling headphones so they can't hear the questions that are being asked of the other investigators.
Or have distractions outside of it. And it's like, what do you call it? Sensory deprivation.
Exactly.
So anyway, yeah, they set this whole deal up, and it's Carl, right? The friend of the filmmaker.
So I love those explanations because they're way better than what I found on Reddit. So I went looking, and the explanation I found for a spirit box was it's a really shitty radio hooked up to a guy who smoked too much weed. So I think your explanation's way better.
Yeah, maybe a little more precise. Yeah. So,
but I think the Reddit explanation might be more accurate.
But so anyway, this scene, so the next major scene in the movie or this series is Carl, who puts on the blindfolds and gets his spirit box going, puts on his noise canceling headphones, and everyone else is sitting on the porch of this cabin that they've rented, and it's at night.
Well, hold on. It's not Carl. It's
Connor.
Connor, yes.
Right.
My apologies, Connor, if you're listening to this. So anyway, Connor, puts these headphones on, I guess activates the spirit box, and he just starts blurting out words like he's like on Tourette's or something. Don't go there. Carl, stop.
Tin can.
Yeah, the tin can played a very significant role in this entire series. I know.
One thing about that, though, I think Carl, when he's explaining the spirit box, he does go into details about sort of how.
Now, is it Carl or Connor?
Carl is the one who describes how the spirit box is working and how they use, he's the one who's describing the session where Connor isolates himself, and then later in season 2, I think Greg does it as well, where they do this isolation process where they put on the headphones, they tape up their eyes, or they put a mask over their eyes. So there's complete deprivation from the outside world. And what they'll do is the other people who are sitting outside with him will ask questions. And then as he's blurting out answers, they'll ask questions, and the more relevant the answers are that they're getting back from the person who's undergoing the deprivation will be more relevant. If they're more relevant, then it's more validation that process is actually working. At least that's the thought process, I think, behind it.
And then as he goes through this, there's a few questions they ask. It's a little obscure for me, and I'll get your all's impression on this. But the one thing that I got out of it was when he was finished, Connor said that in his mind, he got a very distinct and clear image of a tin can with no label on it, just a ordinary tin can. Doesn't know what the significance is whatsoever. And that's the biggest thing I think was drawn from that particular session on the back porch. What was your thoughts, Jason, on the spirit box reading or the session, whatever you call it?
I thought the whole Estes session was really fascinating, but one thing you've got to understand about season 1 of Hellier is a lot of this is drawing on the idea of synchronicity and little.
I forget that.
Yeah. They go into a lot of detail on this in a later episode, but the idea is that there's little coincidences that start to build up and focus everything into a single direction. And that's where they're going with that tin can. At the time, it didn't make any sense until later in the series.
So yeah, the synchronicity part, the idea of Carl, the filmmaker, starting this project, reaching out to Greg with some type of synchronicity, right? So wasn't it, he listened to the podcast and then the very next day, something reminded him of it. It was some kind of coincidence or something happened that pushed him in that direction. So that's what this synchronicity is. A whole lot of what appears to be unrelated coincidences, but then I don't know what most people would consider irony or just a coincidence, an odd coincidence, but they pulled a lot of the significance on these coincidences as if it's pulling you in a certain direction.
Yeah, you know what? I think I would be more convinced if he was like saying, swordfish through the body of a dead bull. And then they went to the cave and they found a swordfish through the body of a dead bull. That would be way more convincing than a tin can, because let's face it, if you're anywhere in a rural area in not just West Virginia, anywhere in the United States, there's rusted tin cans everywhere.
Yeah, especially washed out in the entrance to a mine.
Exactly.
Before we get to that final conclusion of season 1, what are some other things that occurred to you guys that seemed important? What were some significant things
from season 1?
Yeah, season 1. Just to summarize this, the filmmaker reaches out to some people that received this letter some years before. They go to Hellier, try to locate Dr. David Christie, who had these encounters with some goblins or something that for whatever reason he thought was coming out of abandoned mines. They can't find him, and it was only the 3 emails back and forth between them 5 years before that they have to go on, and the descriptions that they had in the emails.
Well, don't they reveal Terry Wrist to some degree? They give a little bit of background on him in season 1.
He does a Google search, I think Greg did, on Terry R. Wrist, and the only reference that they could find was some type of reference in an older UFO book or something.
The Secret Cipher of the Euphonauts by Alan Greenfield.
1994. Pick up your copy now.
Yeah, leave it to the Esoteric Book Club host to know the book title.
Thank you.
Have you read it, though?
I have not, no.
Yeah.
Do you know what's in it?
I have a good idea of what's in it based on what they describe in season 2, and it's not necessarily my personal wheelhouse because it deals a lot with Aleister Crowley-based Thelema.
Exactly.
And that's not something I'm super comfortable with and something that I've really looked into too much.
Yeah, like the Satan worshipping end of things, right?
Well, no, it's a little stranger than that. It was weird because Crowley was very much into putting on this persona of the Antichrist, but he didn't actually believe in Christ or the devil. A lot of what he was drawing from was Jewish mysticism and pseudo-Egyptian funerary practices. And you'll probably have to censor this part, but I was describing him to someone recently, and I said Aleister Crowley is the embodiment of fuck around and find out.
Yeah.
No edits required.
Yeah,
that's sort of like what always happens to a character in H.P. Lovecraft story. Delve into these strange rituals, and then we're going to end up
Well,
dead
it's
or
funny you say that because they
disemboweled
are
by a monster or something.
well, they were contemporaries.
Mm-hmm.
So he may have easily been drawing upon the reports and all this infamous news articles about Aleister Crowley while Lovecraft was writing his stories.
Yeah, those
Well,
early 20th century occultists.
Well, the best thing about Aleister Crowley, though, is that it inspired a Black Sabbath song. So, it can't be all bad. So,
Absolutely not.
Mr. Crowley.
AC/DC does it better.
Yeah, they just get right to the point. Highway to Hell. So,
Exactly.
So is this the first time you guys have seen Hellier?
It is.
I watched the first season. I think I heard about it on one of the other podcasts I listened to about a year ago, I guess, when season 1 was out. Maybe a little longer. So I had watched it then. Don't remember if I finished it and then watched season 1 again. So I'm much more familiar with season 1. So where they go with the investigation after this spirit box session, and what did you call it, Jason?
It's an Estes session.
Estes?
Yes,
What
it's
does
named
Estes mean? I don't know what that means.
Oh, it's the name of the guy who invented this.
Oh, okay. I learned something today.
Yeah.
How
So-
long ago did he invent it?
I have no idea because the spirit box is not that old of a technology.
I wouldn't think so. It sounds like something that's been invented in the past 20 years, probably.
Most likely, yeah.
Yeah. And I do the next day, I believe it's the next day or one of the following episodes, they do some great investigative work. They go to the county courthouse. They try to find out that if Dr. David Christie had ever owned any property in Pike County, Kentucky. And they discovered that no one of that name had ever owned property there. So that's free open records that anyone can go look up at the county courthouse. That's public records. So that was strike one against that being legitimate, I thought. But I was glad to see the investigators do that instead of just blowing it off. They did try to do some serious investigative work to find this person or maybe find where this property was. They did a lot of canvassing. They asked a lot of people if they knew of a David Christie or a Dr. David Christie. And I think that was very important that he was a doctor because I really think in a very small community like that, if there was a medical doctor or even a professor, retired or otherwise, I think people would know that professor. Because I come from a small community myself, and we had a little medical center out in the country run by a local doctor, and everyone that lived on his road, everyone would
Was he
no, he was a medical doctor. Anyway. I don't know. I'm trying to make a good podcast here. You know,
You're working hard.
Jimmy. Anyway, that to me is another strike against it that ever happened. Really, I have to say, there's no one there that nothing turned up with this David Christie. In fact, I think no one by the name of Christie even turned up in all of Pike County, not just Hellier.
That's right. I hadn't heard of Hellier at all. Jason was actually the one who turned me on to it. He said, "Hey, I think you said something like it's on Amazon or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can go and watch it or whatever." That was before Christmas of 2021, which was this past year. We're in 2022 now, so we're recording this. So I was like, okay, once work settles down, I'll have a couple of days off and I'll just binge it, which is what I did. So I'm watching the first episode, and this dude says, I get an email from this guy, David Christie. I don't know him. And I'm yelling at the television. I'm like, dude, check the header. You can see where this came from, dude. Lo and behold, episode 4.
Yeah.
They actually, but it's years later that they do this.
He he just may have not known how.
Well, you work in computers too, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you have insider knowledge there.
Right.
That's true. So I'm like, man, all you got to do is check the header, see whether this guy's full of shit or not. It's probably one of your buddies punking you. And I still believe that might be the case. But that would have been the first call. So the next time this happens, they need to send it to somebody like me so I can trace them back and find out. Now, it's true that when they go through that episode 4, that when you do trace it back, you're going to hit that final IP address, which may be a VPN, which I think is how they sort of fell out with that. So I don't know.
But you have to ask why someone would be using a VPN dialer anyway.
A million different reasons. But in 2012, it was pretty unusual. Usually VPNs would be something that would be given to you through a university, and they talk about this, or work.
Right. I mean, we
government
use
or large companies.
I use something like that, so my IP comes out of Newport News, Virginia, all the time. And I get that. I know how that works.
But somebody using a VPN at that time,
exactly,
someone that it makes sense for would be Terry Wrist. No, I'm serious because he's super paranoid. This guy
I can't get past that name, though, man.
Well, this is what cracks me up. They never once considered that David Christie might have been a pseudonym, but Terry Wrist, they were like, oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Right.
There's no way this could be real. And then they actually interview people and they're like, yeah, that's the name he goes by.
It's possible, but...
Do they ever really come out and figure out who Terry Wrist is? I know they sort of. Does Alan Greenfield ever actually come out and say, I'm Terry Wrist?
No.
Well, let's wrap up season 1 and let's move into season 2.
Okay.
Before we get a little too far, because they continue their investigation in the next season. To me, season 1, and guys, you're going to have to fill me in on this. Somehow I missed how they discovered this mine shaft or this abandoned mine. I don't know. The next thing I know, they're just in it or they're going to it. It's sort of in a overgrown area, a lot of weeds and briars and stuff, and they make their way to this mouth of a mine, an abandoned mine. And then they carry on with their investigation there. But how did they get turned on to that particular mine? You guys remember?
I think one of the locals just told them about it. Like, it's not a significant mine. It just happens to be a mine that's in the area. If I remember, it was near where their cabin that they were renting was.
Okay. Well, I do remember like I said, they did some on the ground research. They put boots on the ground. They interviewed people. Do you know who this is? This or that? And most of the people were their faces blanked out or whatever. And they, I guess, didn't want to sign a waiver, didn't want to be in the documentary or what have you. There were some helpful people that down here at the end of the road, you can check that or whatever. But nobody knew who these people were. Now, I did enjoy the interview of the first gentleman they ran into that night when they first got to Hellier, at the gas station, grocery store, pizza parlor, cigarette outlet there.
I was thinking that was the place just down the street from me.
Yeah. So anyway, that guy, he was like, I don't believe in that. I don't believe we've ever been to the moon. Well, there's planets closer than the moon. Why ain't we went there?
Oh, yeah, that guy, that was cracking me up. I was like, yeah, I don't think you went to the same school I went to.
Yeah, at first one of them goes, you didn't go to the moon? No, we didn't go to the moon. We ain't been to no moon. There's planets close. We've been there. And then, so anyway, have you seen any of these three-toed footprints around?
And I think this is the same interview where someone pulls him aside later and says, yeah, you got to be careful with the questions you ask around here. People aren't going to take too kindly to what you're suggesting.
But what they found interesting, too, and I know I'm backtracking a little bit, was whenever Dana and Greg made their first foray to Hellier a year or two before, the people were super friendly and were like, yeah, we see UFOs all the time. I've seen Bigfoot. They're really into it. Then they go back and everyone seems really standoffish to them. Of course, they are asking questions in the middle of the night when they first reached there. So that could have been part of it, too. They may have already been a few cold ones into a 12-pack by then. Yeah.
I got to say, they seem fish out of water. Greg and Dana and Carl, to some degree, coming down into the redneck territories.
Well,
they do okay. I mean, they ask questions and everything. Yeah. They seem a little out of, I don't know.
They stand out.
They stand
out. Accents and stuff. I mean, if I went to Pike County, Kentucky, right, my accent's maybe not quite as heavy or thick as theirs, but they would probably talk to me, say, before someone from Colorado.
Like Jason, who has good articulation.
I wasn't going to say that.
I got this big scraggly beard that kind of lets me blend in a bit.
That gorgeous beard.
You said I ain't got good articulation. What'd you say? What'd you call me, boy?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. You and I both hunted squirrels with 30-06s. So we can talk the lingo. We can go out with the good old boys and hang.
I don't think that's the same. Quite know what you're talking about there. There wouldn't be a squirrel left.
Yeah, not much left. The big bushy tail.
That's the point.
Yeah, I don't know, Jimmy. You've been living up there with those Northerners so long.
That's true. I've been civilized.
Yeah, so the last episode of season 1, episode 5, they end up it's a sealed mine, but they go into it for a few yards. I'm not sure how deep they go. set
They
up some
don't go in very
ramps.
far, and they find that it's blocked by this large.
Well, of course, it's a sealed mine. They don't want people in there dicking around. But the one thing that that, as we'd mentioned earlier, there was during the whole spirit box thing, Connor said he had gotten this perfect image of a tin can in his mind. And then they're kicking around in the debris, and what do they find? A tin can. A tin can. And they attach so much significance to this. And I'm thinking, okay, it's a tin can. You can find a tin can anywhere, right? I could probably walk down my road and look in the ditch, and I'm going to find a tin can. And people's probably camped and taken shelter in this little place, and maybe deer hunter, whatever. I don't know. Or, as Jason had pointed out, especially some water, flooding, or what have you, it's going to wash trash and stuff down there. Yeah, finding a tin can, they attach a great deal of significance to the tin can that they discovered.
It's the season finale, man. You got to work with what you got.
And then they start hearing noises, which of course you can't hear on audio. They hear a child laughing, crying. They hear voices. They hear whispers. They hear a car door. None of these things that can be heard on the film. And they start scaring themselves while they're in the middle of this cave in the middle of the night. At one point, Greg takes a ping pong ball, halves, and covers his eyes, a kind of a sensory deprivation thing, and then covers his ears and says he has a vision of a UFO abduction. Like he sees trees and all this kind of stuff.
Doesn't he see like a football game before that, or hear a football game before that?
That's really what I remember. It's like watching so many other ghost shows and ghost TV shows. I always feel like they turn their night filters on, everybody's eyes are glowing, and everybody's, you hear that? Did you hear that? I just felt an arm on it. It's like, you're really not saying anything. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I thought it was a bit of a stretch towards the end. They put way too much emphasis on synchronicity.
Well, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the theme of season 1.
Yeah.
But that said, the fact that season 1 had a theme and a set, noticeable theme was miles away from season 2.
Right.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yep.
Season 2, holy crap, I don't even know what was going on there.
Well, before we jump into season 2, let's wrap up season 1. So they spend about 3.5 hours, my understanding, in here. Again, they hear noises, they find a tin can, have a vision of a UFO abduction, and they leave. Connor and Carl go back to Colorado. Dana and Greg go back to Cincinnati, I think is where they live. Mm-hmm. One of them, and I don't remember which one, is reading the Mothman Chronicles. John Keel, we've talked about it on the book before, and there's a line in it that says something about a tin can on the side of the road. And once again, it's synchronicity, right? It's, oh my God, we had the vision of the tin can, and then we found one in the cave, and now I read it in a book. Oh my God. And then I'm like, let's just take it to another level. It was the tin cans that caused lead poisoning with the Franklin expedition that was trying to find a Northwest Passage. It's got to have something to do with the Arctic because there's secret UFO bases up there. Come on, man. Where does it end? Where does it end? Okay. I wanted a can of soup today, and it's in a tin can. Oh, my God.
Is it bad? You're making a whole lot of sense to me. Arctic bases in the UFO bases. North Pole. I'm in.
Yeah, that. I don't know. As far as I could gather, there's other things that happen in it, like something about the Terry wrist and the GPS coordinates of some place they explored in North Carolina a couple years before. There's other things. There's a lot. There's 5 hours of viewing there, so we definitely can't cover everything. But that's the gist of it.
And we're being a little harsh on this, too. We're making fun of it because we're trying to be entertaining, but it's definitely worth watching. Like, it's really well done and really well filmed.
Yeah, I enjoyed the first season a lot. I thought it was a lot of fun. Again, I guess if we want to be a review, I would say if you like ghost watching, ghost hunting type shows and some type of mystery and that sort of thing, where it's a reality show sort of to listen to a lot of speculation about what these goblins could be and UFOs and spirits and all that stuff, then you'll love this show. It's your thing. And they are thorough. They really did try to find something there, but at the end of the day, they didn't really find anything. They call some veteran investigator at the end of it and talk to him, and he's, this thing's pulling you in a different direction. You thought it was going to be this, and now with all the synchronicity and all the signs, you're going to discover that it's pulling you in another direction that you didn't expect.
Yeah.
The way I understood.
As a huge skeptic, I have to say that any show like this that can keep me engaged enough to watch all 5 hours of it, and the quality at which it's produced. I'm very familiar with video production quality, and that's kind of my hobby on the side. And I have to say they did a great job with the lighting, great job with the editing, great job with everything during pre-production, post-production, and production. They did a fantastic job.
And the
Yeah,
intro is creepy as hell.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll go along with you there. It's definitely creepy. In fact, it's really better than most of the Ghost Hunter shows that you'll see on
definitely.
TV. Much better.
Have you been to the website? Is top notch. It's well done, well laid out, great art. Again, the production quality on this, they did not skimp. They did a great job. And even the sound and audio and the music. I think Connor may have been responsible for some of the music for
I think
the
you're right.
episodes.
Yeah, it's very well made, and I liked the on-screen personalities.
Yeah.
I liked them quite a lot, actually. Greg and Dana, they were perfect. All of them were. Connor, Carl's not on it a lot because he's the filmmaker. Obviously, he's behind the camera a lot. But the on-screen personalities are pleasurable people to watch and listen to, speculate about all this kind of stuff. It's a good movie. It's a good series, rather. It's definitely worth watching. Yeah, we're making a lot of fun of it, but that's just the way we roll. So
Carl the most because he's got that beard. He's got that glorious beard.
but Greg returns in season 2 with a beard.
Well, we're not on.
At least temporarily.
Any final thoughts on season 1?
No, I think we
Yes.
can move on to season 2.
Yeah, you good, Jason?
I'm good, yeah.
Yeah. So, Jason, I have to make a little bit of a confession here. It was twice as long, 10 episodes, I believe. Season 2, I couldn't make it all the way through.
I understand. I completely understand. It was a struggle at times.
And I think you've told me that you've actually watched it twice.
Yep. Yeah, I did.
And Jimmy, I think you told me you made liberal use of the fast forward control.
There's a lot of Mickey Mouse talking going on when I was watching season 2.
So
very entertaining.
Yeah, I've watched as much as I could. Now, I've had some things going on. That's one reason we missed a whole week, and Jimmy had to do the solo episode. I've had some things going on, family things, not my personal family, but extended family, and just some things in life, real life issues. It's limited the amount of time that I could devote to it anyway. I probably could have made it if it would have been very engaging, but
not so. It was not meant to be.
So, Jason, I'm going to be laying on you. I think you've done some legwork on this one.
Yeah, I did. And I actually did some legwork beyond the episode itself because there were a lot of things that stood out to me that in hindsight from when this was filmed to what we know now, a couple of the episodes really rubbed me the wrong way, and I'll get to that eventually.
Okay. Well, why don't you just go ahead and give us the rundown, because I'm not going to give a full impression of where it goes, where it starts. And one thing I know, they bring in Strand, which they briefly talk about him. He's very energetic, mostly a solo investigator that goes out, and does this work on this by himself, does it quite a bit. So they bring him in. And I like where Greg said that his enthusiasm was infectious. This guy is just, I
loved him.
This guy's turned up to 11 the whole time. Yeah, he's another very good personality that they brought into this investigation.
That's an acid pond. I'll wade across it to the other side, see what's over there.
Yeah. Well, he served a really important part that wasn't filled in season 1. He was the advanced scout of all the locations they went to. And even some that they didn't end up going to, he went to check them out himself.
Yeah, he went down in one of the caves, I think. Then they revisit it later. Am I thinking correctly on that?
Yeah, and then he followed those GPS coordinates out to the middle of the woods, and then his phone died, which was also his compass. And he got lost and ended up at a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere and escorted out of town by a whole fleet of police cars. It was pretty wild.
That's awesome.
Where did this season begin?
Kick off the episode.
They ended up getting direct responses to season 1. People started writing in, and they were making the podcast circuit when it was released too. So they were interacting with a lot of people who had different opinions and different views of the phenomena. And one of them that stood out the most was saying, "Hey, you need to read The Secret Cipher of the Euphonauts. I think what you've got is a bunch of code, and that you're doing a ritual it's a long drawn out process, but it's an initiation into this magical secret society that you may or may not know about.
Well, I can say I don't know anything about it, nor that book, Mr. Esoteric Book Club.
Well, like I was saying earlier, the big takeaway from Secret Cipher of the Euphonauts is there's this secret code that was based on thelemic practices. And then there was also this interview at the end that was a postscript to the book that Alan Greenfield did with Terry Wrist. And that's how they ended up getting in contact with Greenfield, is they sat him down specifically to say, hey, is this a real person or did you make him up? And Greenfield pointed out, no, this is a real person. I don't know that's a real name that he was, like, that's not his birth name, but that is the name he goes by.
Like a pseudonym.
Yeah. But he also had a bunch of fake IDs, so that may just be his, like, go-to identity. But honestly, the Terry Wrist character, even though you never meet him or talk to him in the episode, to some degree, I wonder about him because he does come across more like a trope of a Vietnam veteran. He's got he's a gun dealer, he's got a secret compartment in the bed of his truck, and he's into all these esoteric things. He was a tunnel rat in Vietnam, and he ran into monsters when he was down there. Like, it's a little much.
Nah.
Yeah, it seems perfectly logical. This is fine. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't the Alan Greenfield work include these stories of these Vietnam vets who get together and go into these caves and kill these aliens or monsters or whatever that are living in the caves? That's part of the stories.
I've heard something along those lines from somewhere. I know there was one guy that had wrote a book and did some UFO convention tours and did some presentations that he was lowered into a cave and had got into gun battles with the aliens living under the surface of the earth. But what you just said is...
That's from Terry Wrist, I think. He claims he was that him and other Vietnam vets. I don't know whether
what was the significance about them being Vietnam vets? I do remember something about that.
They were using specific lingo that was unique to the Vietnam time period and the people that were serving, but they were applying it to, in some of the emails specifically, to the goblin encounters.
So I guess season 2 kind of starts up with, and one thing I forgot to point out that they began exploring a little bit in the first season when they did mention that the Mammoth cave system exists in Kentucky, in eastern Kentucky. And it is actually a massive cave system all under the Appalachian Mountains. And they pointed out, of course, Mothman, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, western part of the state would be perhaps part of this cave system as well. And so they start looking at all these different strange encounters everywhere in the Appalachian Mountains and say, can this correspond with the Mammoth cave system? Is the Mammoth cave system, and the Mammoth cave system is aptly named because it is gigantic. There's all kinds of caves that you've heard about and they're actually connected. It's, I think, hundreds and hundreds of miles of caves, if not thousands. And they do connect quite a bit, but I guess no one's ever explored them all. But their idea is that maybe there's this underground passageways and things where these strange encounters are actually connected because they're connected to the underground cave systems, that somehow these creatures are moving about underground, the goblin-esque creatures. Like they discussed the other case in Kentucky where the UFO landed or crashed, and they said in Hopkinsville, Kentucky.
Yes.
Remember that? And they drew that's actually season 1. They talked about it. So quite a bit happens in season 1. I guess I don't have to give it all away, but there's a lot more there. And they say there could be a correlation there based on the descriptions of the creatures. So who knows?
And season 2, they get progressively more esoteric. By the end of season 1, they're doing spells and rituals. Season 2, they're getting into some really in-depth concepts like Ultra-Terrestrials, which was something that John Keel came up with, where they're alien in a technical sense, but not like from outer space. They're alien from other dimensions that overlap our own. And they're talking about how the cave systems and the quartz and the limestone foundations of a lot of these areas create portal zones where the dimensions are thinner and these things are coming through. they get really in depth with some of their concepts, but it seems like they explore all of it without really differentiating which direction they're going in ultimately.
Yeah, I know there's one episode where they get into fairies and they start looking at a book that was published that had these stories about fairies and the descriptions of how they look and some drawings, and they're trying to draw correlations to that. And a little bit of it touches on what we've talked about on the podcast a few times or alluded to, a book by Jacques Vallée, Passage of Magoni. Have you ever read that yet? Have you read that yet?
I'm about halfway through.
Okay.
I intended to do an episode on it, but I found out I definitely could not read the entire thing in a month.
Yeah.
So I will be returning to that event.
Yeah,
but yeah, I got about halfway through, and it's really good, and it's really fascinating.
It's fascinating. And this book was published in 1969. Jacques Vallée, we've talked about on the podcast many times. He's a genius, computer entrepreneur, programmer, but he also has this interest in UFOs that he's always had. He's a French national, but he's a United States citizen now. But anyway, Passage to Magonia explores how, particularly in Europe, you have these old legends and stories of fairies, goblins, elves, and how maybe they correlate or could just be descriptions of what we consider the gray aliens now. Or even that maybe the gray aliens are just our way in our modern era to manifest them into something we can more easily comprehend or understand. And that back then it was an elf. Today we see a spaceman. But in the long run, it may be a phenomenon like creatures or some type of community that's been with us from the beginning of time somehow. And they just manifest in different ways based on our own technology level, and that we just interpret them as space visitors. So anyway, I found the book to be completely fascinating, and it made a lot of sense in a lot of ways to me personally when you start adding all that up. But back to Hellier, yeah, they're looking at a lot of legends, a lot of different things. They spend some time on Indrid Cold, which we did an episode on Indrid not too long ago, a couple of 3 episodes ago.
I learned he was African American from this episode, from one of the episodes of Hellier. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. I never read that.
Yeah, one of the interviews, I believe it was the lady who was supposedly going to release a book and everything and never did. But in one of the interviews, I think it was John Keel actually asked, was he a black guy or something like that? And the person was just like, how did you know? Like, how did you guess that? Because it was a detail that was never released.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, but spoiler alert, he apparently died in the saucer crash, and his son is now,
I forgot about that scene.
Conrad and Conrad or something like that. Conrad and Conrad? Two guys that started with the name C.
I just remember Connor because it corresponded with one of their cast.
Yeah, Connor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I forgot about that part. Yeah, they visited a lady in a rest home or something, the one that was going to publish a book, and I think she had sent them an email to let them know that Indrid Cold had passed away in a saucer crash. I think it was a mid-space collision with some humanoid craft, which I don't know what that meant, but yeah, Indrid's no longer with us, at least in this universe.
I don't know what you guys felt about that interview, but I felt like the only thing it lacked was a straitjacket and some rubber walls.
I honestly felt sorry for the lady. It seemed to me like she was someone who just wanted an outlet. She just wanted someone to talk to, ultimately.
Well, it reminded me of the way Betty Hill purportedly got near the end of her life. Everyone respects the Betty and Barney Hill UFO abduction, the grandfather of them all, the one that started the way we understand UFO abductions today, being taken aboard a ship, having the experiments done on you, and then the amnesia afterwards that you can only remember through hypnosis. That's de rigueur for today, right? That's just the way it's done. But Betty Hill, near the end of her life, still went to UFO conventions and, just tell these outlandish stories and have all kinds of pictures and slides of just like street lights and say it was a UFO that landed in her yard and all this kind of stuff. So I think they had to quietly limit her amount of time. They'd have to say, thank you, Betty, for sharing all this today. Now, please go take your seat. She'd go like 3 times as long as she was supposed to. And things like that. So,
Man, I have a post-abduction plan. Man, if I ever get abducted, I got like a Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise style plan to sneak something off the ship. That's exactly right. And then we'll be able to test it and we will have proof. I know. I'm a little disappointed that given my youth. So I grew up in southern West Virginia in a rural area. I was up in the woods all the time. We went caving all the time. And even as recently as a couple of years ago, I've been caving. I've never seen a goblin. I've never seen anything weird. Maybe I'm not eating the right mushrooms or sniffing the right black mold. I don't know. But I want some of this stuff to happen to me because I can't take it seriously until I have my own experience.
So here's the key. You have to start eating straight from the tin can.
The 1947 can.
Yeah,
You
just
have
get
to
your
hope
can
it's-
of beans, heat it up in the cave entrance there, build a little fire, eat it from the can with a spoon. Then you'll start seeing things.
Yeah, and don't forget to cut the ping pong ball in
yeah.
half. Put the two halves over there.
Make sure that the can of beans expired in Mexico in 1982.
And was sealed with lead solder.
Absolutely.
Flint, Michigan water. I got you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the cup of water that you add to the soup. Right?
That's right.
Oh,
It's a
man.
very specific recipe.
We're making friends here tonight.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Where did that season? There were some other notable things that happened in there. We learned Indrid Cold met his end in a saucer crash. What were some other notable things that happened?
It wasn't so much notable, but it was a good piece of investigation that I appreciated, and that was them tracking down the Wagon Wheel restaurant.
I love
Ultimately, I don't know that it served any purpose because it was just a location where supposedly Indrid Cold was witnessed or spoken to, or
That was
I
his
don't
house,
honestly
right?
remember.
Yeah, that was his house by the wagon wheel. It was supposed to be near a church and a graveyard adjacent to the church. And it was near the wagon wheel. And they went and they found the location. And there was a parking lot in the area where that house would have been back in 74, 75. Because the wagon wheel was in operation from 74 to 78, I think is what they said. Something like that. And it had been torn down and replaced with a parking lot. But they did find the location. And it's clearly stated in their source material where Ingrid Cold's house was purported to be.
So Indrid Cold had a house?
Yeah, he's got to have some place to kick up his feet at the end of the day when he gets out of the saucer, and he's got to relax a little bit, pet the dog, that kind of thing.
Tax records for Mr. Cold?
That's where a lot of the contradictions of this season really start to really kick in. Indrid Cold is a non-physical entity who is an alien, extra-dimensional person, but also has a physical body and embodiment in southern West Virginia, or I guess that was in Kentucky. But yeah, it's contradictory and confusing, and I don't know that they really address it.
One thing I do know about him, though, is his telepathy apparently does not work through a rolled-up window.
That's true. Yeah, Derringer had to roll down his window in order to receive the communications, the telepathic communications. It must have been a little weak. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe he had a hangover.
Maybe the glass was made from the old lead glass. You never know.
Do you remember the Amy character?
That is something I have very strong opinions on.
Yeah, I'd like to hear it.
So Amy, how did this go about? She contacts them after, was it season 1 or hearing them on a podcast or something?
Yeah, it's in season 2 she contacts them after
Right.
hearing the season 1 stuff.
And she talks about this story where she goes camping in the woods, hears a woman screaming in pain, and she's with her boyfriend, and they're so scared they hole up in their tent and they don't go out or they don't investigate or anything. But then she goes investigating on her own during the daytime, finds a cabin with this bathroom that has a hidden elevator that drops down into an old abandoned mine shaft. And she finds like ritual gear and an altar and places where they're doing human sacrifice and like a hidden pedophile ring and all kinds of bizarre stuff down there. And she says everybody in the town is involved. All the cops know about it. And now she's in prison because she got too close.
Oh, what about a tin can? Did they find that?
No tin cans this time, no.
But she is in prison.
She is. She's a real person. They tracked her down.
Yeah,
They did
breaking
interview
news.
her.
Did they interview her in the show?
Yeah, towards the end, they ended up calling her on a video conference from the prison. They blur out her face and everything, but they do interview her. And it's... So this is where my strong opinion starts to kick in. And this is some of the footwork that I did after the fact, after watching the show, because I wanted to look up specific dates for conspiracies. So according to the web, the Pizzagate conspiracy began in 2016 and really ramped up through the election period.
Let everyone know what Pizzagate is.
Oh man, Pizzagate is this bizarre conspiracy about the political elites being able to order children for pedophilia purposes by phone by ordering a pizza.
Every time I hear pedophilia, I always think about that line from the television show Firefly. Hell's reserved for is a special place in hell reserved for people who speak during movies in the theater and are pedophiles.
I miss that show.
I do too.
So yeah, they interview her, but I found out that the conspiracy for Pizzagate was already in full swing. It seems like a lot of what she was telling them is the build-up for the QAnon conspiracy that we all saw take place and really come to a head in 2020 during the election.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just this continuation from the Pizzagate conspiracy in 2016 leading through to 2020. And I even looked up specifically, I had to track down the episode and the email, because they did show her email on the screen. I looked it up to get the date that she contacted them first. So season 1 aired in January of 2019. She contacted them on February 1st of 2018, before the episode aired. And Greg even mentions this in the show, saying he panicked because he thought part of the show got leaked.
Oh.
And she was contacting him about this stuff that corresponded with their investigation for season 1, which at this time no one had seen.
So another synchronicity.
It's that one's definitely a synchronicity. I'll go with that one. That's far more plausible than the tin can. But as intriguing as some of the story is, I feel this is just another person who really got caught up in drugs, because she is in jail for possession and breaking and entering. And she has bought into the QAnon conspiracy, whether she believes or whether she knows it's a QAnon conspiracy or not. She's hearing stories of a story, and she's applying it to her real life around her.
Yeah.
The first time I watched season 2, and this was back when it first came out in November of 2019, none of this was really in the zeitgeist. In hindsight, looking back several years later, you can definitely see where this is building up to something.
What were some other things that, and see, that's one of the parts I didn't see. It makes me wish I would have went back and heard that one now. But what are some of the other events? And again, I never felt like there was any real clear direction of what they're trying to find out.
There really wasn't. They were grasping at straws, really, and they were chasing synchronicities that really didn't always pan out. Did you see their interview with Alan Greenfield?
No.
Yes.
I don't think so.
You definitely need to go back and watch that one specifically. First of all, they flat out ask him, "Are you Terry Wrist?" And he says, "No, I've interviewed the guy," and it was a big coup for him to actually get that interview. They also interview another person who encountered Wrist when he was a kid. Did you see that?
No.
Oh, there's this guy. I'd say he was probably close to 30 at the time when they interviewed him. And he was talking about how he met Terry Wrist when he was a teenager. Met him at a gun show or something like that. That's how we find out that Terry Wrist has this stockpile of guns in the bed of his truck under a secret panel. And
right. Now, I heard some of that. See, I guess I did skip around a little bit. So trying to, see if it was going to pick up somewhere, I guess.
Yeah.
So I must have just missed it, but I do remember that part. Yeah.
But the big thing that came out during the Alan Greenfield episode is where they decided, I don't even know why they showed him this video clip. It was something they did back, I think, in 2015, completely unrelated to Hellier. They decided to try, because everyone does post-hypnotic regression, to remember alien abductions, right?
Yeah.
So they hire a hypnotist to induce an alien abduction in a participant who has never had an encounter with an alien. They decide to make him believe that he had been. Initially, he had very strong visceral reactions to the memory, the created memory. And the longer it goes on, he progressively forgot everything. And the only lasting thing from that experiment was that he now believes in aliens, whereas before he didn't. But they showed this video clip of them doing this to Alan Greenfield, who was very clearly not pleased with them for doing this.
Oh, really?
So Alan Greenfield is an interesting character. He seems to be experimental in a lot of his magical practices and conspiracy theories and things like that. But that apparently crossed a moral boundary for him. And that says a lot. And honestly, I found it super uncomfortable to watch them do this. Like, ethically, that's not even a gray area. The guy was a volunteer, but man.
All in the name of science.
Basically, yeah. And that's how they came out of that, is they were like, well, this was an interesting experiment. It had unique results. Is it ethical? No, probably not, but it's done, so there's not too much you can do about it at this point.
Where did season 2 wrap up? What did they discover?
I don't want to use the word wrap up. The words wrap up.
No.
Have we left it open now for a season 3? Because from what I understand, this has been a very successful series for them, so I'm sure they're going to want to keep it rolling, right?
From what I saw, there are no plans for season 3 at this point, but they are leaving it open for the possibility.
Yeah.
And you were asking how this ended? Season 1 ended with tin cans. This one ended with Mylar star balloons. I wish I were joking.
I have 2 things on my list we didn't cover that I just wanted to bring up. The first is, did you guys see the section, I believe it was actually in season 1, where they talked about the UFO that was spotted over Hellier?
Yeah.
They even had the news program and had video and photographs of it. That was pretty cool.
And it was a long witnessing, too. Like, the whole town went out and watched it.
For hours.
Yeah, that was wild. And
yeah, pretty
I've never heard of that. Have you?
No.
It looks really pretty cool. So that was one thing that really, because I'm more of a UFO nut, I like that kind of stuff. Not so much into the paranormal or the cryptids. Steve brings the cryptids in and everybody else brings the other paranormal stuff in. But the other thing I found interesting was, remember when in season 2 they went to Ashland, Kentucky? Yeah. And then they stopped a police officer to ask him questions.
Oh, yeah.
And the police officer, I will tell you one thing about Ashland, Kentucky. I don't like to talk bad about anything, but we have a lot of mental health issues here. We are in the right place. God.
Well, they also interviewed the guy who does the Pennyroyal podcast, and he talked to someone who runs the state mental institution, or whatever the current terminology is, and he broke it down that, of the people that are in that institution, a massive portion, like a majority of the people in there, come from Ashland.
Really?
And there's no explanation as to why.
That is odd.
That is begging for some kind of scientific research.
That's begging for a documentary in its own self. That's crazy.
And if you haven't listened to it, I definitely recommend that podcast.
Pun not intended. Pun not intended.
What's that podcast again, Jason?
Pennyroyal. I think it's 5 episodes, maybe. It's been a while since I listened to it, but it's really entertaining. It's very well produced, and it lays out a story very much like a murder mystery podcast,
like Serial or something like that.
Yeah, I want to check it out.
So you guys are going to have to explain to me, because again, I apologize. I just could not make it all the way through this thing. So how did you say it ended again? On what?
Okay, so in episode 8, I think, there is one scene where they're walking through the house, and if you pay attention to the background, they have a board up with yarn tied to different threads across the thing. It looks like a cat had a stroke and then snorted some cocaine, got a hold of the yarn, and strung it across the wall. That's how season 2 ends.
With all these connections.
Pretty much, yeah. So going back to the balloon ending, Strand finds this Mylar balloon when he follows those coordinates out into the woods. And he just picks it up. He doesn't think anything of it. Well, after they interview Alan Greenfield, he says, that was your sign. There's some sort of weird connection between there being a blue star on the balloon to Sirius, the planet Sirius, and the dog star, and how the star is blue. And it's this real lengthy conspiracy. But then they keep having incidents like a tree in the road that they have to move to get through. And then there just happens to be a Mylar balloon tied to the tree. And I believe there's 3 different instances where there are Mylar balloons in some way either impeding or directing their path.
Strange.
It's really strange. That I followed that as a synchronicity more than the tin can. So the final episode ends in a cave. So you remember in season 1 where they do a little ritual and it's pretty innocuous. Well, by the time they get to the end of season 2, they've looked into the rites of Pan and some of these obscure fairy texts and everything. So Dana puts together a full initiatory rite that is to be done in this cave with candles and incense and representative objects for the elements, and they all have to go in and take their anything that's made of steel or iron they have to remove from their bodies. It's super elaborate, and it seems like they're really just amping up, but this was at the direction of the viewers of season 1 who said that they were doing this initiatory rite. But doing a rite in a cave to a deity of Pan or the Green Man, compared to where they started with Injured Cold, that transition gets really muddy in between.
Yeah, I guess my thought of it was the portion that I watched and why I lost interest was I felt like there was too much of them kind of sitting around the apartment just, hey, I read in a book and I found this sentence and I think it connects to this thing, and then a lot of what if all the way through it. But what if that? I felt like, I think the first season I thought the length was very good. Even though it really ended inconclusively, it still wrapped up and it really held my interest. I watched it a couple of times. I watched it a couple of years ago and I watched it again and recently for the preparation of this podcast. And I really liked season 1, but for whatever reason, man, season 2 it's just all over the place. And there was just too much of them just sitting around the apartment talking about stuff and not really doing much. I guess for me, that's the way I felt about it. And I didn't finish it. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
It would have been better if 1 or 2 of them had eaten by a goat-headed, shark-toothed monster.
Or if Pan would have made an appearance after the rite. You know,
something like that.
Big goat.
I would have been happy with more goblins, but, you know.
Oh, yeah, the goblins would have been cool. Hey, I would have been okay with just the goblins. Actually, you know what? When they described the goblins in season 1, I immediately thought of mangy raccoons and the little 3-toed feet, coons, because it's in slurry. And when you put a foot in the slurry, it spreads out. So it looks bigger than what it really is.
It did look like it slipped a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm thinking mangy coons because they got those big silver eyes. When they're mangy, they don't have all of the cool bandit looking gig up.
But they'd have the ears.
They'd have the ears.
Yeah, I think they were too large for that, from what I understood.
I don't know. Some of them are well fed down south.
I've seen some big raccoons around here.
I don't know what else I have to add. Any final thoughts on the Hellier documentary series, seasons 1 and 2?
I think that season 2 may have been a rush job in response to the popularity of season 1. Because there's only, if I'm looking at the dates right, maybe like 8 months in between the release of season 1 and season 2. Now, they could have been working on it ahead of time, but a lot of what was filmed in season 2 were people responding to season 1. Yeah, I think it was really rushed.
I would say it's great production. It's well worth watching if that's your jam. That kind of stuff is your jam. Season 1, definitely. Season 2, not as much, but maybe you like that sort of disjointed story that has a bunch of different angles, but some high points in there too, some interesting stuff. If it's your jam, I definitely say the production's worth watching. And it's won a ton of awards.
Yeah, I like I said, I really liked it. And maybe if my life wasn't quite as chaotic as it's been the past 3 weeks, I could have easily got through season 2. But I think my thoughts about season 1, loved season 1. Season 2 probably should have been 5 or 6 episodes as well. I think if they would have edited some of that show, man, season 1, that very first episode was put together well. It drew me in. I'm like, I got to find out about these goblins. What is this? And you got 4 episodes to go, and it really draws you in. It's really masterfully done. Season 2, I just didn't feel, and then part of it maybe too, I had just finished season 1, and I didn't feel like the payoff was quite as good as it should have been after the build-up. So maybe I went in a little more jaded with season 2, but it couldn't hold my interest personally. But anyway, like Jimmy said, hey, it's very well done. The on-screen personalities are really cool people, and you can learn a lot about some of this esoteric stuff. it's pretty cool, and I probably will finish up season 2 in the next few weeks. So I may bring it up on another podcast just to let you know. So I may be like, oh man, that thing was brilliant by the time I got to the end. So highly unlikely. Do you think they'll do a season 3?
I honestly don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Let's look on the interwebs.
They might be working on a season 3 even as we speak, and just keeping it under the...
Well, last I saw, which was, I believe, yesterday when I looked it up, they still have it listed as a possibility, but it's not in the works.
Yep, I saw the same thing.
Okay. Well, maybe they're thinking about it. They are just 3 or 4 or 5 now, just regular people, that I'm not sure if they have day jobs or what they do.
I wouldn't say they're regular.
But I mean, it's not like these guys are Hollywood personalities or anything. So
I think Greg's a full-time paranormal investigator, one of the few.
Yeah, and they have the museum.
That's right. They're traveling occult museum.
Yeah.
Okay. And it could be there's 5 different personalities involved. I think when you get that number of people involved in a project like that, especially that they're from different parts of the country and have different focuses of what they think which direction the show could go or whatever, and that could be something about it too. I think maybe one guy's, I think we should focus more toward the Indrid Cold connection or the Mammoth Cave connection, and then somebody else wants to talk about this. And I think that could have been another problem with that season was all these different ideas, just too many ideas, not enough real substance there.
For season 3, and maybe they're taking a little bit more time with season 3, and we'll see something really cool come out of them.
Maybe so. That would be great. I would definitely watch it. Like I said, it's well done, and it's good personalities, and I don't know what else to compare it to out there, really.
There really isn't anything comparable for this. The closest thing I could think of is Hulu, I think last year, released a documentary called Bigfoot, which started out as a private investigative journalist looking into reports of Bigfoot on a weed farm, only to find out seriously, there's this story that Bigfoot tore apart these guys in the middle of the field.
Oh, yeah.
It ends up being a crime report rather than anything else, which was super fascinating. But that's really the only thing I could compare Hellier to.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I followed that, actually. Yeah, that's really cool.
I guess we'll just wrap things up here. Jason, it's a real pleasure having you on the show again. Appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts of the Hellier seasons 1 and 2 with us.
Yeah, it's always great talking to you.
Yep. It's a hoot having you, man.
Listeners, be sure and check out Jason's Esoteric Book Club podcast. I guess you put it out once a week, or how often? Every other week. And he also does a news show, which is related to it. And it's a lot of fun to listen to as well. Any other things you got in the works? Any other things you want to let listeners know about?
Nothing's set right now. I know there's 3, maybe 4 events coming up this coming year that I'm scheduled for, but nothing in the immediate future.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep an eye out for all that. And I guess you have your webpage is
esotericbookclub.org. And I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon.
Hey, Jason, you're going to be at Mothman this year, if they hold it?
I haven't decided yet. I'm waiting to see if it takes place.
Yeah, because they canceled it last year.
Yeah.
We're hoping.
I've already booked. Elizabeth confirmed those dates are the dates they're going to have.
Mm-hmm.
Actually called somebody there. So
yeah, so we're going to try. I don't know what we're going to do. We're probably going to do maybe a booth if we get one, but definitely not going to be doing any kind of presentation. I think it'd be fun to record a podcast there.
Oh, yeah.
They try that. I don't know.
If nothing else, I will at least attend.
Oh, okay. Sweet. Great. Awesome. All right, man. Well, I think we will wrap it up here. But before we go, I'd like to remind everyone to please rate and review the podcast. It bumps us up in the ratings and helps other people find the show. Go out and tell a friend. Go out and tell a coworker to listen to Cosmic Sponge. Check out our webpage, cosmicsponge.com. Our contact information is firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. And we are also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Jimmy, are we leave anything out?
Nah, you always know it, man.
I don't know about that. But at any rate, with all that being said, this is Stephen Hawk signing out. And I'll see you next week.
Jimmy Co, keep your ass to the skies, feet on the ground, blah, blah, blah. See you next week.
And this is Jason. Until next time, remember, stay weird.
That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.